The president is trying to take the entire country on a roller coaster ride. Whereas, roller coasters have their ups and downs and steep climbs and then deep fall as well as very harsh turns. So all of which this country and its people are made to feel that they are having a temporary exhilarating experience. But then once the wheels come off from the trains in the roller coasters, they will all have to face the serious problems. Now, when the wheels come off, those who have asked the people to get onto the roller coaster may not be there. They won't climb the roller coaster. The president, his bureaucrats who have prepared these budgets may not be on the roller coaster. But the others, the poor people, would have finally suffered. This is an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe that the entire humanity is facing at the current times. The type of horrendous war crimes, which amounts to a genocide, is being committed in the occupied Palestinian territories by the Israeli Defense Forces. Is that the domestic debt optimization was the third and the largest bond scam. The president as finance minister can prove the market wrong by disclosing the numbers.
I deny your allegation, and there was nothing. No, the numbers were given.
The quantum is so large. Right? That is why I call this a third bond scam. May I, at the outset, refer to what President had yesterday told this annual post-budget forum organized by the Daily FT and the University of Colombo MBA Alumni Association, where he has given a pragmatic perspective of the dynamic nature of the 2024 budget, flexible framework for the future rather than rigid estimates. Having said that, he also has taken a dig at our colleague Eran Vikramaratne, who opened the debate on behalf of the opposition, where he mentioned that this budget is a Disneyland budget. For that, the president had responded yesterday saying, yes, we were in the house of horror in the Disneyland and I have just taken them out of it. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek statement by the president. And if I am to use the same metaphor, I would respond saying that, yes, the president is trying to take the entire country on a roller coaster ride. Whereas, roller coasters have their ups and downs and steep climbs and then deep fall as well as very harsh turns. So all of which this country and its people are made to feel that they are having a temporary exhilarating experience. But then once the wheels come off from the trains in the roller coasters, they will all have to face the serious problems. Now, when the wheels come off, those who have asked the people to get onto the roller coaster may not be there. They won't climb the roller coaster. The president, his bureaucrats who have prepared these budgets may not be on the roller coaster. But the others, the poor people, would have finally suffered. That is what to use the same metaphor, I would describe that this is simply a roller coaster ride, giving temporary exhilaration to themselves and nothing but that. But I also would like to refer to this particular reference by the president yesterday. We are keeping our fingers crossed that there will be a ceasefire in Gaza, making it easier for the people of Gaza and the rest of us. The president, having at least made a cursory comment on that, must be congratulated for his particular stand, and also must comment on what the Prime Minister spoke today in the morning about Israel's atrocities in the Gaza Strip. This is an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe that the entire humanity is facing at the current times. The type of horrendous war crimes, which amounts to a genocide, is being committed in the occupied Palestinian territories by the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, way back in 2005, the United Nations adopted a principle called R2P principle. The right to protect was adopted as a concept, international legal concept, to enable the international community to intervene when a government ill-treats its own citizens. A government attacks its own people, commits horrendous crimes within their territory. Through this concept, international community created the avenue to intervene, overstepping the principles of sovereignty. They also created a center for international intervention and sovereignty to develop this concept. And that concept was used by the Western nations to send the UN peacekeeping force forcibly to southern Sudan and to finally create South Sudan as an independent sovereign country, and thereafter to also intervene in Libya, intervene in Syria, and of course previously the interventions in Iraq also could be justified under the same principle. So what they did was to destroy all these countries on the pretext of using the R2P principle, the right to protect principle. But that very principle is not being used against Israel. And that is the issue that the third world countries are asking today. At least our nation had the courage to call for immediate ceasefire. But in our neighborhood, our great neighbor India, unfortunately, we must regret that they have not had the courage to do even that. Such is the influence of these Western powers. They have virtually become slaves, even in the face of such horrible atrocities being committed in the occupied territories of Palestine. Therefore, I would urge that our government must go one step further and be in the forefront to gather the countries in the region and far beyond to keep pressure on the United Nations and the UN Security Council to see that an immediate ceasefire is declared and that these horrible events will never be repeated again. Having said that, Mr. Presiding Member, I must also refer to the detailed budget speech by the President, where he says, if you analyze the budget and the estimates, you will note that the budgeted revenue is 4.3 trillion. The recurrent expenditure, which is consumption, alone is almost 5.4 trillion. And capital expenditure is a further 2.5 trillion, resulting in a total expenditure of 7.8 trillion. Honourable Presiding Member, based on these numbers, following the President's commitment to follow this Samajiva Kata, that is this balanced living concept based on the Vejapajya Sutra, as professed by Lord Buddha, the President's budget estimates are way off, meaning we have a revenue of 4.3 trillion and recurrent expenditure of almost 5.4 trillion. Mr. Presiding Member, what this translates to is we have to borrow to finance consumption, totally against the very concept that the President was trying to preach to this House. Now, Mr. Presiding Member, let me also say, in light of the President's elaborate rationalizing of this Samajiva Kata concept, as explained by Lord Buddha in the Vejapajya Sutra, is the basis of expenditure estimates in the budget 2024. Therefore, the total expenditure estimated in the budget at 7 trillion compared to the 23 budget, which was 5.2 trillion, this is an increase of over 30%. The estimated expenses of the Presidential Secretariat for 2024 is to increase by another further 35%. While the estimated expenditure on education in the country is less than what was provided for in 2023. As a percentage of GDP, we have had various experts commenting that for a country to prosper, for its education infrastructure to be improved, Dr. Ramesh Patrana's late father, Richard Patrana, was one of our former ministers of higher education and education. And even from his days, he had been lamenting that we must at least have 6% of the GDP allocated for education. But this government has barely allocated not even 2%. of the GDP for education purposes. So this is the sad state of affairs. Now, if this is the situation, the president concept of the Samajiva Katha, or has he got any other sutra to explain this concept? This is what I would wish to ask. Now, the next issue I want to highlight and address today is the impact of the domestic debt optimization issue. Honourable Speaker, when the President, who as the Finance Minister took this step to hit the private sector below the belt and ransacked the poor workers, the part of their future benefits from the DDO, he rejoiced that he had paved the way to conclude the debt restructuring. To date, Honourable Presiding Member, none, including yourself, and this House is aware of the status quo of the debt restructuring. He says in the budget that he is expecting it to be completed by December. And if it doesn't happen by December, God forbid, we'll be in deeper trouble. The sad part of the assault on the bellies of the private sector ETF account holders is that a certain segment of investment community made windfall gains because of the domestic debt restructuring decision. Honourable Presiding Member, I would like to ask the President, who is also the Finance Minister, to disclose to this House the quantum of profits made based on capital gains by the banking sector, the non-bank financial institutions, the primary dealers and private investors out of their investments in government bonds as at quarter ended June 2023, post the assault on the superannuation funds. Also, Mr. Presiding Member, I would like the President as Finance Minister to disclose to this House the quantum of tax paid by the banking sector, non-bank financial institutions, primary dealers and the private investors on the windfall capital gains that accrued to them due to the assault on the superannuation funds. This is in light of the Governor of the Central Bank telling us in the Committee on Public Finance that banking institutions pay over 40% tax. Therefore, that they had to be too cautious about imposing more tax on them. It is only prudent that the Finance Minister discloses to this House the quantum of tax collected in respect of the windfall capital gains by these people. Honourable Presiding Member, I have these numbers. It is very easy to compute. All these institutions publish financials on a quarterly basis as a mandatory requirement. So I am requesting the President as Finance Minister to disclose to this August Assembly, which is responsible for finance aspect of the country, the amount of gains that these few people have made through the domestic debt optimization program of the President. I can tell you the amount of windfall capital gains made by the segment. It is beyond comprehension. The vibe in the capital markets, Honourable Presiding Member, is that the domestic debt optimization was the third and the largest bond scam. This is what people are thinking. Honourable Presiding Member, the President as Finance Minister can prove the market wrong by disclosing the numbers. If he has the courage, let him come out and give us the numbers. Because this is such a serious matter. Now look at what has happened in the sugar scam. Previously, we had this sugar scam where from 50 rupees per kilo, they brought it out to 25 cents overnight. And a few importers made a windfall out of it. A rough calculation was said to be in the region of 16 billion rupees. This was during the former president's time. Now the current president does the opposite. The duty on import of sugar was increased from 25 cents to 50 rupees overnight. That again has enabled select set of sugar importers. The Honourable Deputy, the State Minister for Finance is also coming here. So he knows. Now this is, you can't hide this. A select few have made a windfall out of this overnight revision in duties for sugar imports. Now this type of scams, now we have the International Monetary Fund talking about the governance diagnostic report. Now one of the important features of the governance diagnostic report is to have a proper awareness about the corruption vulnerabilities and address them. Now, having promised the IMF that we are going to address our corruption vulnerabilities, and we are repeatedly allowing certain segment of people, on the one side on the DDO, you allow the primary bondholders, the primary dealers, some of our private banks and financial institutions to make a windfall. Honorable State Minister, I call this the third bond scam. That is it's a stupendous amount that all these people have made for themselves. And this is the final result. And you are talking about addressing corruption vulnerabilities. On the other hand, see the sugar scam and see the other issue about the liquor labeling issue on the excise side. That was also exposed thanks to Mr. Champikaranavaka in the Ways and Means Committee. Unless it was exposed there, I don't think the government or the excise department would have been able to discover that type of fraud. But finally, now you are happily presenting a budget having totally ignored the serious corruption vulnerabilities that are still existing and continuing to exist. So unless you address this issue, there's no way in which you can turn around the country from the abysmal levels to which we have gone, particularly in managing our economy. Now, various issues have been raised yesterday, even in this seminar, by a variety of people. There are certain good proposals. Now, agriculture modernization, fisheries, dairy, tourism, export-led manufacturing, these are all identified as priority development areas, along with increased investment in renewable energy and universities. Now, there are the proposals are good, but then all these revenue proposals, the expenditure proposals, sometimes they are very, very unrealistic. Now, you look at establishing an airport. Now, before establishing Hinguragoda, of course, it is important for us to have an airport and a place like Hinguragoda, rather than Mattala should have been built in Hinguragoda. True enough, it's good for our tourism sector. Even yesterday in the seminar, some in the tourism sector has commented on that. I think Mr. Balendra had spoken on behalf of the tourism sector and had applauded the President for having taken that step. But then, what about the second landing strip in Katunayaka? That's much more important. The second runway in Katunayaka is much more important and much a bigger priority than in Hinguragoda. Though you have given a meager, now last time also you were trying to establish a medical faculty and saying you were allocated 200 million. Right? Whereas the existing Sabaragamuwa medical faculty doesn't have a professorial unit. So first you have to address the shortcomings in the existing university system before you start new universities. Of course, I must congratulate the President for having taken some bold steps regarding the higher education reform side. I have no time to speak in detail about those matters in today's debate. I shall take it up during the committee state debate on higher education. Thank you very much, Mr.
Honorable Rauf Hakim, you made several allegations, but I don't want to reply on everything. But on this specific note on the DDO, I deny your allegation, and there was nothing. No, the numbers were given. The numbers were discussed at the Public Finance Committee. The numbers were divulged to the Parliament. The proposal itself we debated. So the problem is, your suggestion, what you are making, was not considered. That was a different scenario altogether. I mean, you have all the right to propose. But on the DDO, if we had not gone through the DDO, Honorable Rauf Hakim, the country would have collapsed within 48 hours, because that wouldn't have paid way for us for going to a debt restructuring on external debt, which was very crucial for us. So the DDO was very crucial, as well as the external debt restructuring. So I think the point which you are trying to make on corruption, on the DDO, I would not accept, I would deny that. And on the other hand, yes, there is a diagnostic report from the IMF, which the report has been published by the government, and we are taking all the measures to ensure that we take all the steps. to mitigate corruption in the country.
Mr. President, member, just a comment. Now, I am not at cross purposes in the entire DDO concept itself, but then this particular issue of the windfall profits made by the primary dealers, the banks and some of the financial institutions, the quantum is so large, right? That is why I call this a third bond scam, because everybody is silent about it. Right? And why don't you at least land a super tax on them? Super tax on the monies that are made. Massive amounts have been made.
Honorable Rauf Hakim, that is your view. I mean, you have all the right to propose. No, you have all the right to propose. But do you know, I'm sure you are aware of it, when the DDO was presented to Parliament, when it was passed, everybody was happy with the DDO which was presented by the government.
But he objected.
No, you objected. I mean, you have been objecting to most of the cases, not you, specifically the team. So let us work out other matters, how we could strengthen the economy. If we had not gone through the DDO, the way we went through, the country's economy would have been in a catastrophe again.